This is Party Wall Pro, the podcast where surveyors tell you how they first started and how they've grown their business, making it easier for you to get to the top.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of Party Wall Pro, the podcast. It's been a while again, and I'm really sorry. The reason why it's been so long is because we've been busy working on a software for your schedules of condition. And actually, Michael, that's something I never actually talked to you about, but our Party Wall Pro customers have been asking us for ages for a tool to help them with their scheduling. And so we've developed something on phones so that they can take pictures and dictate on their phone, one device, and it automatically inserts the pictures into the report with the relevant condition, avoiding the hassle of, after site visit, you come back to the office and you have to go through hundreds of pictures and decide which one goes to which condition. So we've been busy developing that. And the second reason is also because I actually wanted to have this podcast, and we've been talking about this for nearly a year, I think. And of course, with public consultation and all that, it took ages. So I'm really excited to have Michael Cooper with us, who's, as you probably already know, head of Neighbourly Matters at Colliers International, and you were the chairperson of the working group, right, on this 7th edition.
That's right. Yes.
So the purpose of, or the subject matter of this podcast is the RICS 7th edition Party Wall guidance note, who will, if I'm not mistaken, be effective on the 1st of December this year. Right. So, so yes, this podcast is more of a kind of a lecture format as opposed to Q&A, because Michael has a lot of good stuff to deliver, but I hope we can cover kind of where the 7th edition is coming from, what the changes are, and maybe kind of a good way of explaining to our audience what they need to know in order to implement the 7th edition. So I hope this is a good enough introduction, Michael.
Thank you. Sorry about that. There was a phone going off.
Okay.
Yes, it was. Thank you. Yes. So, where do you want to start?
I maybe. How did you get involved? How did you end up?
Okay. So, essentially, the RICS, as I'm sure you're aware, is currently split into a number of faculties. So that includes building surveying, land surveying, quantity surveying, etc. Now, I can't claim to know anything about the inner workings of the RICS. Suffice to say that I think each faculty head takes a certain responsibility for ensuring that guidance is kept up to date. And to do this, they select a team of advisors from the relevant area of the profession. And I happen to be on the RICS Boundaries and Party Wall panel, which actually comes under the Faculty of Land Surveying. So it was decided essentially by this panel, at the advice of myself and another practicing Party Wall surveyor, that we should consider a revision to the 6th edition of the RICS guidance note. Following a little bit of online criticism and some relevant criticism of the old guide. Changes being born mostly out of commentary on case law. So I was tasked, along with Andrew, to form a working group to essentially relook at the guide and see if it needed any adjustments. So that's, for want of a better description, where it started.
Okay. Yeah. And how long did this all take?
Right. Well, I would say 15 months or so.
Right,
start to finish. So once we formed the initial working group, we basically set an agenda of trying to meet once a month and we initially put in, I think, 8 meetings in the hope that that would be enough. It proved that that wasn't going to be enough. It took, I think, about 15 meetings in the end. But once the working party had formed and we got together, we actually sort of subdivided some tasks. We went away in smaller groups and came back with our small group conclusions on certain things. But on the whole, we literally sat in somebody's office for 4 hours at a time and went through the old guide page by page, comment by comment, and added in a few new things of our own. You'll note that there's a new draft of the wall, for instance, in the back. Mostly at the insistence of Nick Isaacs. Met with a lot of resistance initially from us surveyors who don't like changing things, but then we saw the sense of it, and after much sort of to and fro, came to a conclusive document in the end that everybody's happy with. So, to answer your question, quite a long time. There is a whole process behind it as well, because the RICS need to also consider the document, consider the commentary in the context of giving wider advice to surveyors on ethical codes, conduct, etc. So there was a consultation period with them as well before the public consultation. And then, of course, there was a roadshow, which I think you're aware of, which went around the whole country.
Oh, good. Okay, so let's get into the meat of things. How do you want to cover that? Do you want to cover the main changes? Do you have a list of certain changes you want to cover? Do you want to cover everything?
If you don't mind, I'm going to read a few little notes that I've made for myself, just to assist, but I'm not going to read them verbatim. But I think probably the starting point is to look at why we started this originally in the RICS committee. And I think that was born out of the Lee Valley in Derbyshire case. And essentially there was some criticism of the draft award in the appendix of the edition 6. And the criticism there was related to the ability to ask for making good as opposed to compensation in lieu of damages associated with party wall work. Now, the last draft, now let's be clear here, the appendices and the whole guide is the guidance document. Unfortunately, people do have a tendency to copy certain clauses verbatim and consider them appropriate because they are in the recommended guide. And I'll take a good example of this. Scaffolding clauses, for instance, have seen them appear in awards related to Section 6, which is foundation work. Now, clearly, there's no scaffolding needed to dig a hole. So people, unfortunately, copy the clauses. And in this particular case, I think a clause went in to say that making good as opposed to compensation in lieu was an appropriate remedy. That was a standard clause in the old draft award. Let's be clear here, the actual remedy is only available for making good under sections, and I'll read them, 22A, E, F, G, H and J. All other clauses, the remedy is under section 11A for compensation. So the clause of allowing the making good, and I think it's in relation to section 6 award, if I'm not mistaken, the remedy for making good is not available under the Act. For that particular section of work. The remedy is compensation for damages. So the award read that making good was the required remedy, and that was ultra-vires, or outside of the Act. And the old draft award within the RICS standard permitted that. Essentially, it should have been edited by the surveyors in question, but it essentially repeated it verbatim. And I think the judge had a heavy criticism of the RICS draft. I think what you'll see now in the current draft is we do say, please look at these documents and edit them appropriately for the use that you intend to place upon them. So that essentially was the first and probably main criticism of the old guide that came through mostly through online conversations, there's certain sort of LinkedIn forums, etc., for party wall surveyors, and quite rightly so. I think it was worth reiterating that clause wasn't necessarily always relevant, and so there's these edit clauses. So one of the things, as I said, that we put in the guide was an emphasis on editing clauses, but we've also made distinction between the making good availability and the compensation in lieu. So that was where it started. Okay, let's look at some of the other changes. Do you want me to carry on, or?
Yes, please.
Right. Okay.
I'm taking notes as well.
So I would also say that another significant area, probably not the most significant one, was the emphasis on ethics. And the guide focuses some immediate attention in the opening chapters on rules of the RICS and rules of conduct. I think it's particularly important, and we have emphasised the certain rules that surveyors should be familiar with. And it should come as no surprise that we don't have a special status because we're acting under statute. We still have to perform our duties to the codes of the RICS. And this has been emphasised. And Rule 3, members shall at all times act with integrity and avoid conflicts of interest and avoid any actions or situations that are inconsistent with their professional obligations. Rule 4, which was members shall carry out professional work with due skill, care and diligence and with proper regard for the technical standards expected of them. And Rule 5, members should carry out their professional work in a timely manner and with proper regard for standards of service and customer care expected of them. I would say, and this is also stated, I'll read this because I think this is a particularly important part of the guide, where an RICS member is appointed as a party wall surveyor, there should be a real benefit to the customer in terms of the requisite competence, ethical behaviour and customer care of an RICS member. That's something that's very strongly on my agenda at the moment, to ensure that the ethical standards of practicing surveyors are not overlooked or overshadowed by the statutory provisions, and that we must maintain this level of customer care, put our reputation, our professional body above the rest, because essentially we undergo years of training to become chartered surveyors. To take our charter, we start with degrees. As you know, we have to sit through professional tests of competence, and then we pass our charter. And part of that charter, and what sets us aside from the rest, is our ethical standards and our rules of conduct. The fact that we have to carry PI insurance, for instance, it's essential for RICS surveyors. It may not be essential for people that don't have professional qualification. And that is what sets us aside. So this is an RICS guide for RICS members, reminding them of that fact. That I think is very important. Moving on, because that's a little bit of a hobby horse. But that, nevertheless, the RICS guide now covers it. I've mentioned before the requirement to make good, and of course we made a lot of revisions throughout the guide on making good clauses, and specifically identified what those clauses are. We mentioned the Lee Valley case. Now, you may see very few mentions during the guide of court decisions. And the reason for that is that most of the decisions that we have on party wall matters are in the county courts. And they're not necessarily binding. They can be overturned at the future by a higher court. So to report them within the RICS guide could be an error, because we could go to publication and a week later a different county court judge or a high court judge may have a different opinion. So we have cited cases where the decisions are finalised by a higher court. So they are binding decisions only. So although we have, using our own sort of, let me explain. The panel is made up from chartered surveyors, barristers, one of whom just recently taken silk, a member of a university lecturer, and both young and old surveyors. I might just emphasise that as well, young and old. And one of the criticisms that was that, and this is an online criticism, that we're all a bunch of old fuddy-duddies. Now, I don't think I'm that old, but we have particularly younger surveyors on the panel, but obviously with some experience. So they need experience to be able to advise on a panel like this. So, Jack Norton, I'm sure you've interviewed already, were both very helpful in the production of this document and added some help for some sections where perhaps some of us are stuck in our ways a little bit and resistant to change. So I don't think we can be criticised of that anymore.
No, I've got the list here, and it's true. It's quite some important players on there.
Well, certainly, we've got a barrister or two who are very familiar with party rule legislation and have acted in some fairly significant landmark cases. I would suggest that their influence was paramount to this document being actually, something that we could reasonably rely on, and I hope that the courts can reasonably rely on as well as quite a secure starting point for behaviour and if you like, expected standards of party rule surveyor.
Yeah.
Do you want me to carry on?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, so we emphasise in the guide as well the difference between contractual appointments and statutory appointments. And I think it's important, and we did emphasise this as well, particularly for building owner surveyors, the importance of supplying terms and conditions of business. It's an RICS requirement, and I think sometimes overlooked because there's a statutory appointment under the Act, but there are also terms of business that need to be supplied. Now, I'd like to mention there's a particularly useful section as well in 751, I think, which deals with surveyors' fees. This particularly is an additional wording. It said a surveyor may wish to make an owner aware that an adjoining owner may be exposed to costs if, for instance, they make excessive demands on either the surveyors or give rise by their actions to additional and unnecessary time, such as incurring surveyors in additional time for making abortive visits. Now that I like to stress because a lot of people have this misconception that it's the developing owner that pays. That's not always the case. In fact, Section 22B of the Act provides for the surveyors to determine, this is in relation to a wall that's in defect or wanted repair. So it gives the surveyors the right to determine who should pay, who's responsible for the defect or lack of repair, and who should pay a proportion of the cost. And it may be that cost is shared. But let's also be clear, there are some owners, joint owners, that may want to frustrate the process. Now, the Party Rule Act is an enabling act, enabling the construction by one owner, and within the parameters provided by the Act, there's certain things that they can do. 13 permitted rights under Section 2, Section 6 rights and Section 1 rights. The frustrations of an owner next door who may not want the work to go ahead, that steps in to try and do anything they can to delay and frustrate the process. Well, they should be aware, and they should be made aware very early on by the surveyor, that they may be liable for the costs, or part of the costs, if that is what they are doing. So, unfair to label any owner with that tag, but it's worth reminding them that if you are called out on a claim of potential damage, but the damage already existed, for instance, who should pay for your time? Well, rightly or wrongly, it should be them if they are calling you out on a spurious claim or maybe unneeded claim, clear and aware of their own property as well. There's precondition surveys that are taken, for instance, that will help them to determine whether or not they need to call you out on that issue. So most surveyors will offer a second visit.
So how do you communicate that to your owner? So that because you were talking about T's and C's, so you would put something like that in your T's and C's, saying.
I do. I have some paragraphs set out in covering letters, which accompany terms and conditions, setting out and explaining exactly that. That if I am called out on a claim that is, if you like, irrelevant, not part of the act, or called out, and I haven't made an attempt to, in the first instance, sort of discuss it with the neighbours or remedy the situation, and it turns out that it's an error in mission, then I may be charging them for that time. To be clear, I'm not going to call them out if they're just a bit worried, if it's not a lady that says she's got to be taxed and wasn't too clear on the idea, but would like me to look at it. I think I'll do that out of kindness of my own heart. But there are some owners that will insist that you come out every 5 minutes, and wrongly so as well. It does happen. So I think it's right to set that out, that they could be liable for those costs when taking instructions.
Okay. So that's specifically mentioned in the 7th edition, saying you guys are responsible to communicate that to your owners.
Yeah, and also we suggested, following the Mohammed and Lorientino Stevens case, and I'll read this: the prudent surveyor should secure terms and conditions with the owners for the possibility of a matter being withdrawn by consent and his having incurred costs in advance of the reward being made. So now what we meant by that is that there's a possibility that the surveyors may be engaged to settle a matter in dispute, and perhaps after an inspection that there's not too much of a matter to be had, and they advise their owners accordingly, and the owners then withdraw the matter of consent. Well, the surveyors have incurred some costs in this process. So as suggested, and it was followed that case, it would be prudent for the surveyors to actually have set out that they will charge if it is going to be removed by consent, so that they have the ability to recover their time costs. There is then a contractual relationship on the owner who withdraws the matter by consent. So the consent probably should be with conditions that the owner will meet the costs that they've incurred to date when they remove it. So that's appropriate advice, I think, to give to both owners and surveyors in that context. So we have concentrated a bit of effort on surveyors' fees, terms and conditions, how to sort of secure that appointment, understanding that it's not always the adjoining owner that pays the costs. Again, something new to the new guide. I hope that's helpful for surveyors.
Yeah.
Do you want me to carry on?
Yes, please. Yeah, that's a really good point.
So, as I said, one of the main changes the guy suggested was a revised draft award, and I give him full credit for pushing this ahead. The surveyors don't like radical change, and it appeared in the first instance that the first draft that he put forward was quite radical. After we examined it, we realised it was pretty much the same thing. It was just slightly reordered. And what it does is it separates those matters that we can award from those matters that we want to mention because it helps the award. I'll give you an example. For instance, we can't award social foundation consent. Previously, I think in our section 4, we said we've tried to throw it in somewhere within the award that there is a special foundation consent. We can't award that. That's the owner's privilege to say yes or no to that. But we can mention it. So in the introduction part of the award, there's a section now to identify those matters that you've relied upon to make your award, but they're not part of the actual award itself or settling of the difference. I.e., we have made this award on the basis that special foundation consent has been given, and this is where we're going to say that in a separate section to our award, and we're going to carry on and make the award then that the foundations, etc., as per the drawings attached. So essentially we're separating out those matters that were within our control from those that are not. I think it's a much more robust document than the last draft. It can be varied by surveyors. I no doubt many surveyors will have their own form of award that they prefer to use. I think it's important to see what those changes are, and I would suggest that surveyors start adopting some of those changes because it has been looked at by legal heads as well as surveyors. We did conflict slightly too. And I'll give you an example where we conflicted. It was on the signature pages. Apparently an award probably doesn't need witnessing. It's also questionable as to actually where it needs signing by surveyors. We decided to leave those in, mostly at the insistence of surveyors who felt it was appropriate to record the date and indeed their signature that they had approved that document, so as to not to confuse it with previous drafts. The witnessing signature block, again, not essential, but it's a recognised industry standard that most of us put into our awards. I would have no problem signing an award that didn't have a witness block. It's not essential, but it does help. And it also helps, I think, in litigation, if it ever arises, that the judges or the people examining that award have the confidence in knowing that the surveyor did actually sign it and that somebody saw them sign it when they said that they signed it. And I think that's particularly important now with one of the other main changes we're focusing on, which was the Electronic Communications Bill, which came into force and has amended the Act. It's a piece of legislation, has brought about two changes in the Act itself, in Section 15, I think. If I misquoted that, forgive me. But there are two new sections relating to electronic communications. A word of warning goes out on that one, and this is personal thought. I am concerned that particularly if an owner doesn't agree to receive something electronically and perhaps doesn't acknowledge receipt electronically, then it could be questionable as to whether or not they received it, or that it was a correct form of publication of an award, for instance, or even notice. So I would be very cautious of using that without consent and acknowledgement. And I would recommend there are providers out there that can give read receipts or acknowledgement receipts to important documentation. So the Electronic Communications Bill, there's some hint that there's the possibility that there will be further cases in relation to the use of electronic communications for publication of important documents like awards. So I will wait to see what the courts decide in latter years. But the guidance note does introduce new sections relating to electronic communication because it is new. It's something that wasn't previously in the Act at all.
So for the moment, from a kind of practical perspective, you would recommend surveyors to try to get consent being served electronically and make sure that if they do, that the owners actually send an email back saying, I have received it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, yes. I think that's very important. Particularly, I think particularly important because the date of receipt, as it were, electronically, is the start of the appeal period, the 14-day period for appealing an award. And I think it's important to recognise that some people may not open their emails every day, that there's a potential conflict between the time sent, time received, although apparently it's instant, but it can take some time sometimes. I don't know if you've had that delay, somebody sitting on the end of the phone saying, I've sent it to you, and it turns up 10 minutes later. But not only that, I also think that there's a possibility of error, and you type the address incorrectly, put a full stop in the wrong place. It's very easily done, and it's never received, but you think it has been. And that poor owner is sitting there without the award, suddenly to find it, you sent it to the wrong email address. So for your own protection as a surveyor, I would strongly recommend that you get a receipt acknowledgement from whoever it is that you're sending it to. But certainly they need to approve that they're going to receive it in that manner in the first instance.
Yeah. Okay. That's something that could be included in Party Award Pro. Just thinking.
Yeah, it's quite likely.
So yeah. Good. Next point. That's obviously, well, do you have more points regarding the award itself? Because is it from a practical perspective, you suggest the audience to just go and have a look at the 7th edition, go and have a look at this award, and think for themselves how to implement it.
And we have made that absolutely clear as well, that this is a suggested document. It's right. It's good practice. It's been looked at very, very carefully by the panel, surveyors, as I said, solicitors, barristers, and others, and members of the RICS as well. This is a good practice guide, and essentially this document is very robust. I'm very, very pleased with the outcome. I was one of those that was very resistant to it initially, but I'm very, very pleased with the outcome. And I would say it's a must read. Have a look at how it's composed. Try it. I, strangely enough, had my first one through just the other day, and I read through it and I thought, well, this is fantastic, because I can see where everything goes, and it all seems to be in the right place. Whereas before it was a bit muddled. And I'm not suggesting that the previous draft was necessarily wrong; it was just muddled. This is clearer, and it does make a distinction between those matters that surveyors can award and those matters that, for instance, who the owners are, who the surveyors are, etc., are separated from the actual determination of the dispute. There's the one thing I would like to go back on, because you started with schedules condition. You mentioned your services, etc. We added a clause in, and we did this because there's been much debate as to whether or not a condition survey is required. My view on this is that a condition survey is almost essential, and not least because it enables you the opportunity to visit the adjacent property. When you visit the adjacent property, whether you're acting as a joint owner surveyor or building owner surveyor, then you can determine the nature and construction of that building. And you can understand then the risks that there are associated with the building owner's works. If you don't carry out that visit, how are you to know what that structure is composed of? So it could be made of glass. And if you're sitting behind a desk and don't visit that property, you cannot determine whether or not the building owner's work is going to have an unnecessary effect on that adjacent structure. So let's be clear, you need to visit. And you also need to understand the internal workings of that property. So those naysayers that say don't do condition surveys, it's not in the Act, well, frankly, how are you going to make your determinations if you don't understand the nature of that property next door? So we have put a clause in, and I'll read it again if I may. The appointed surveyor should understand the construction, fabric and condition of the adjacent owner's property before making an award, and if necessary visit both owners' properties to understand the consequence of the awarded works. And that's a clause which was very carefully considered by the panel and felt appropriate by all, that this is something that surveyors should do. So going back to where you started, condition surveys are, in my view, a requirement of good practice as part of all surveys.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the form is now. Wasn't it in the 6th edition? Wasn't there something about schedules saying specifically how they should look or something? And the 7th edition is not.
We extracted that. Frankly, we don't think we need to tell chartered surveyors how to do a schedule condition. Not least that everybody has a different way of writing schedules. You suggested that you can actually do it with a camera dictaphone of some description, which is great. Things are moving forward. Electronic means are enabling surveyors to do things better, perhaps, in certain ways. So I'm not opposed to that. And to just put a standard form in that people feel they have to follow because it's in the guide, I think it's inappropriate. I think surveyors know how to do condition surveys. We didn't feel it was necessary to put it back in.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm looking at my notes now from the roadshow because there are quite a significant number of minor changes within the document as well.
Mm-hmm.
some of which was born out of discussion on words used or terminology. We had 130 responses at a public consultation. We took on board every single one of those comments. Some we addressed, some we didn't. I'm sure you can understand we had a few time wasters in there as well. We had already considered a lot of the questions in advance and in our own determination, so we felt that we'd already covered those. We did make a few changes, and I think it's important to recognise that the terminology that we've used is intended to be surveyor friendly. It may not be strictly in accordance with the terminology used in the Act. We are being user-friendly in the guide. So that type of criticism really isn't very helpful. We did have a lot of that from one or two particular individuals who I won't mention. There are changes in that we try to improve the drawings, for instance. No doubt there will be some level of criticism on that because drawing technology isn't that brilliant. We did have some help from some CAD technicians that helped us put some new drawings together. We changed some standard letters, drawing owners' appointment letters, building owners' appointment letters, and so on. We made provisions for electronic communications. We changed the draft award, which I'm sure I've mentioned.
So that's, I have to say thank you very much for changing all this, because that means that I've been actually looking at the award already, because with Party Award Pro generating all these documents, I'm going to have to adapt everything, because we're going to be 7th edition ready on the 1st of December. So I've got a lot of work ahead of me. That's good, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Well, it comes into force on the 1st of December, I think.
Yeah.
So it is the 7th edition, August 2018. I've got a copy in front of me. It is available now to RICS members through their usual subscription, and I'm sure it will become public document if it isn't already.
I think it is. Yeah, it is. It's already up there. So you covered what, 6 points, 6 points. So the making good ethics obviously is something that is something that should already be out there. So it's just putting down on paper the obvious, but for some people it's not that obvious. T's and C's. So that's something that obviously would require to take a few steps for people who have actually never thought of that. The draft award, that's obviously that's a lot of work for everyone if they want to implement it, and they need to do their homework. Schedule a condition, so that's. I'm actually quite surprised, because I thought doing a condition survey was kind of everyone would do it, but I guess not. Some people are just too lazy to get in the car and go on site.
You wonder about that.
And anything else you want to add to try and get more of a the surveyor out there that wants to be 7th edition compliant. It's obviously getting their hands on the 7th edition first.
Well, absolutely. I would suggest that they look at all of the proposed standard documents at the back in the appendix, but it's worth having a thorough read all the way through. As I say, almost every single section, rather, the old edition was reviewed. I think almost every section had some revision of some kind. So there isn't, under a main section, I don't think there's any one section that went without amend. I think it's important for surveyors to keep up to date, and I think it's essential for Party Award surveyors to be familiar with current thinking and case law, and things that are changing the environment in which we're working. The Party Award legislation itself doesn't evolve. It doesn't change. Although having said that, the Electronic Communications Bill did amend it. I think, however, the Act being unchanging is changed by case law. So we have methods of working now that we've adopted from case law, and also construction techniques are changing constantly. So I think it's important for surveyors to keep up to date with case law, guidance notes, and other essential reads written by solicitors or barristers, articles on LinkedIn and things like that. I too often come across building surveyors who feel that they should engage on party wall matters, but we're limited on our experience. And I would suggest that they should be very cautious of doing so without understanding the wider concepts involved and perhaps the case law and the history of the legislation and how we got to where we are. Because it's about the interpretation of a piece of legislation. It's not just about using a guide and following it verbatim. You have to think. And this guide, I think, emphasises the need to think by surveyors and not just follow it verbatim. They need to think for themselves and apply it to the circumstances. So that's essentially what I would add. Think, use it, but use it wisely. Consider what those draft documents say and which bits need changing.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great way to conclude.
Conclude
this podcast. If anyone wants to get in touch with you with questions and stuff, do you want to?
I'm always happy to answer questions. I participate in the Pyramus and Disby online consultation. So when questions come through, the Pyramus and Disby Club often directs them towards me. The RICS as well, and I'm happy to take questions from surveyors or owners on aspects of the Act where I can help. I will. I can't promise I can provide all the answers, but I can certainly try.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks a lot. Your email address is out there anyway, so
sure.
I don't need to give it out. Michael, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll see you around.
Pleasure.
Bye. Bye then.